Hey, it's Anthony. I wanted to make sure everybody saw in the news, in case you missed it, that the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society has a new name, Blood Cancer United. And it really represents, I think, better than the old name, what this organization is all about. But while the name has changed, the mission hasn't. And I wanted to elevate this conversation with Dr. Andy Kolb from a year ago, because that's exactly what we talked about, the importance of mission-driven leadership. In fact, Dr. Kolb shared with me that within their organization, each meeting begins with a mission moment. And that's really meant to ground the team and the patient experience, and also celebrate exciting innovations from the organization's research funding. So, new name, same mission, Blood Cancer United. I hope you enjoy today's listen.
When we have big meetings, for example, as a company, as an organization, we will always start with a mission moment to bring ourselves back to the patient experience, to bring ourselves back to some exciting innovation that has come out of research that we've funded. And that grounding moment is a great way to make sure everybody's present, everybody's inspired, everybody's ready to get to work. And that type of connection and that type of reminder surrounds us in the nonprofit world.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest, Dr. E. Anders Kolb. As president and CEO of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Dr. Kolb leads the organization in its mission to cure blood cancers and improve the quality of life for blood cancer patients and their families. Andy has a really long bio, but here are 3 things that I think that you should know before we dive in. Number 1, Andy's a world-renowned pediatric hematologist oncologist, having made his mission to better the lives of pediatric cancer patients and help find a cure for cancer. Number 2, before joining LLS, he served as chief of the Division of Hematology and Oncology of Nemours Children's Health and director of the Moseley Foundation Institute for Cancer and Blood Disorders, and is vice chairman for research in the Department of Pediatrics at the Sidney Kimmel Medical College at Thomas Jefferson University. Number 3, Dr. Kolb has authored or co-authored more than 150 articles included in peer-reviewed journals and received numerous awards, including the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Eastern Pennsylvania, Delaware region. Andy, you've been called many things, like a top doctor by Delaware Today and Philadelphia Magazine, SEMA S. SONAD Mentor of the Year, Nemours Researcher of the Year, Volunteer, CEO. Today, we are thrilled to call you Chief Influencer. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. Appreciate you.
Well, I'm really excited about this conversation because you've worn many hats, but all really pointing toward the same mission and vision. And I just wanted to start by asking, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society was the only cancer and healthcare organization in the non-for-profit category that made Fast Company's 2022 Brands That Matter list. And I know you've been involved with the organization for a long time in many ways, even before your appointment to CEO. So I wonder, what do you think it is that makes the brand of LLS so special?
Yeah, I think like any business, it's probably about the product. For our donors and community engagement, it's all about putting on amazing events that bring mission to the community, that bring fundraising and fun to the community. It's also about making sure that we are out in front of scientists with the best product, funding the best science, bringing the best drugs forward in clinical trials, making sure that we are investing in those innovations that are most likely to benefit patients and their families. And lastly, making sure that we are advocating for patients and families and bringing the truth of their lived experience to our congressional leaders, to our state legislatures. So for us, it's all about the product. It's all about how we present ourselves to the community and how we present ourselves as an advocate for innovation to help patients with blood cancer.
And you kind of touched on, you have a lot of different stakeholders, and I want to get to
Yeah.
that in a second. But, I think it was in 2007 that your connection to LLS's mission became very personal, when your wife was diagnosed with follicular lymphoma. I understand her treatment was made possible because of the pioneering work of LLS-funded investigators. And I wondered if you could talk about how this experience impacted you and how it has affected the way you serve as CEO of the organization now.
Yeah. So I've been a pediatric oncologist since the beginning of this millennia. I've been a practicing pediatric oncologist for almost 25 years. But and in pediatric oncology, Leukemia Lymphoma Society was a supporter, but it didn't have a huge place in the pediatric cancer community. Uh, so when my wife was diagnosed with lymphoma in 2007, specifically follicular lymphoma, LLS was an organization I knew about, but not an organization that I really did much for. So I started volunteering for the organization because the drug that made my wife better was developed through investments by the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. The investigators were supported, the drug development was supported by LLS. So I joined the local chapter, I served on the local board, participated in all the campaigns. I was the president of the chapter for a while. And I did all of that with really with a personal family interest. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, we started talking. As a pediatric oncologist, I was a clinical researcher and responsible primarily for developing new drugs for children with leukemias. And we re-engaged Leukemia Lymphoma Society in conversations about developing drugs for kids, about making a bigger investment in pediatric oncology. And that grew into what is now called the Dare to Dream initiative, which is $175 million 5-year commitment to pediatric blood cancers. I was one of the early chairs of that effort, one of the early architects of what that looks like. And that gave me exposure to all the amazing work that LLS does. And when there was an opportunity to be considered for the CEO position, I jumped at it. And what's wonderful is just this month, LLS has announced a $20 million investment in follicular lymphoma, the disease that my wife has. So, has come full circle in so many ways. It started with my wife, brought it back to pediatrics, which is my training, my passion, my mission, and now able to bring it back to my wife as well. And that was a collaboration with other foundations that are interested in follicular lymphoma. That was not diverting LLS funds to support that, but bringing a community of people together because I have such an interest and credibility in that space.
Well, that's incredible. And I think it shows how you've been able to play a really unique role at bringing different players together to, work toward a common vision. I'm sure your local chapter friends were so excited when you became CEO of the national organization, and you had a lot of knowledge already, of course, from your involvement there and from the work that you had done. But I wonder if you could talk about when you became CEO, what steps you took as a leader. I know, for example, you started with a listening tour, and I wondered if you could share a little bit more about that and just sort of your thinking stepping into that role, because certainly it's a different type of role than you had as a pediatric oncologist and researcher.
Yeah, I would describe myself prior to joining LLS as I was a clinician scientist. I saw patients, and I spent a lot of time working in the lab and in clinical drug development. And there's not a lot in that teaches you about running a big business, and LLS is a big business. There are a lot of leadership skills you develop along the way, but I needed to understand the business of LLS. And so my listening tour was to travel the country and and LLSs in every state and we're divide the country up into 27 regions. We've got leaders and fundraisers in all of those different regions. So my job was to go out and meet with them and understand what they do, understand the patients in the communities that they serve, and the unique challenges, how we reach patients in rural communities versus how we reach patients in urban settings, how we help patients navigate clinical care when they've got a major medical center down the street or when the major medical center is 4 to 6 hours away. And then who are the people in those communities that are willing to support these patients and their families through fundraising and as well as volunteer support. And then also to learn the other side of the business, finance, all of our contracting, all of that. So I had a lot to learn this year, and no better way to do it than to talk to the people that are doing the work every day, day in and day out. So that was a big investment of time, but the lessons that I've learned have informed where the organization's gone next, and it was a great use of my time.
Yeah. I'm sure that they appreciated you engaging with them in that way. And obviously, it's always, a moment for a team when a new leader comes in to wonder, who's that leader going to be?
Mhm.
And I imagine there was a real sigh of relief when they learned about your background and how engaged you had been as a volunteer and that, connection. And I wonder if you could just maybe talk about some of the conversations that you had with the team, the things you've learned, and, maybe what has surprised you over the last year as you've settled into this role and begin to develop the strategy going forward.
Yeah, being a CEO is very relational. I need to understand and through that understanding, be able to address and concerns in the organization and inspire people to step up to the challenges that we face. So, in my interactions with the organization, I'd like to think that what people took away from that was my interest in listening to their perspective, um, taking lots of notes and bringing those notes together into some key themes about the organization and the challenges that we have to face, and uh, my interest in continuing to engage them after the fact through email or other communications, to understand how we're doing and to know that they work for LLS. I'm the CEO of LLS, but I'm here in service of them too, to make sure that they're able to do their jobs. I think that's what's unique about running a mission-based organization, is that at the end of the day, if we do our jobs well, the patients and families benefit. Patients and families with blood cancer, patients and families with all cancers benefit. And connecting everybody in the organization to that mission and how they contribute to that mission is central to what I try to do when I go out and meet with the teams throughout the organization.
Yeah, I'd love to ask you about that because I think, there are a number of different health organizations out there that are fundraising for research, but there aren't a lot of them whose senior leadership and executive leadership have been in the position like you have to not only serve patients and families through, research advocacy, et cetera, but who've actually worked directly as a clinician. Clinicians obviously have some of the toughest conversations that anybody ever has to have with somebody. And I wonder if you could talk about what have you learned from that experience or brought from that experience of working with patients and families in that way to your role as CEO? Because it occurs to me that's probably somewhat unique experience that you bring to the chief executive position.
Yeah, it, what I loved about pediatric oncology is that we get to be helpful when a family's in crisis. I have many years of training and education, and I'm lucky and blessed that I'm able to take all that and manifest it in a way that I can help patients and families, and understand that, there's many things I can't do in this life, and that's one of the things I feel like I'm equipped to do. So it's really a privilege to be in that position. And and I think what you learn as a clinician is that um, it is a privilege and responsibility to be invited in the room when a patient is in crisis, and to have the opportunity to help them. And I think sharing that sentiment with the organization, that it is our privilege to be in a position where we work for an amazing organization like LLS. We have amazing offerings to help raise funds for patients and families, and for research. And then we've got an amazing team that ensures that those funds are spent in the most impactful way, right? It's a wonderful organization to be a part of. And what I think I can add to it uniquely that comes from my clinical experience is just the sense of responsibility that we all have, and the sense of privilege that we have to be in a role where we can have an impact, right? We get to come to work every day and say what we do is going to matter for somebody. And uh, it is, as a clinician, it's something that never gets old. It's that awe and that privilege is something that never gets old.
Yeah, quite a responsibility, but really brings meaning and purpose to what you do every day when you're in that role. I want to ask you, you talked about some of the different ways that LLS helps patients and families. How much, because I'm sure a lot of folks don't know the inner workings. They might have heard of, your fundraisers or your advocacy.
Yeah.
How much of the work of an organization like LLS is focused on meeting the needs of today's patients versus research and innovation that will impact future patients?
I think that's the other perspective of a clinician that informs the structure of an organization like LLS, is that often getting the right drug to the right patient, that's just the first step, right? That's just one element of it. We need to make sure the patients are educated. We need to make sure that they can pay for the drug, that they can access the drug, whether it's, through travel, or whether it's through, they may need help with paying bills or parking. And then we need to make sure that we learn from the current infrastructure, identify what the gaps are, where are the holes, where are the cracks that patients are falling through, and talk to our legislatures about making meaningful change so that doesn't happen again, right? Of the within the cancer ecosystem, physician prescribing a drug is a small piece of that. And so LLS is focused on being an integral in that entire ecosystem, but representing the patient and the family. So we support innovation for all diseases, all blood cancers, and making sure that we have a pipeline of innovative therapies and innovative science that are informing not just today's therapies, but therapies over the next 5, 10, 20 years. We need to make sure that patients and families are educated about what therapies are best for their disease, that they have the navigation support so that they can, if the therapy is not available to them, or if the therapy is difficult to get with their insurance, or if the therapy is only available through a clinical trial, that we provide the support that patients can get access to those therapies no matter what. And then lastly, that we are sharing with our federal and state legislatures the challenges that patients face, and working on meaningful policy change at both federal Medicare level as well as state Medicaid levels, to make sure that all patients have access to the care that they deserve. And it's particularly important and particularly challenging as you think about innovations over the last 5 to 10 years. We are seeing new therapies, especially immunotherapies, coming into the clinic that have, sometimes a 5, 6 figure price tag, even more in some sense, in some cases. And not everybody can access those therapies because they may only be available at a certain type of medical center and could be hours away from any individual patient. not everybody can pay for it because their state Medicaid plan or their Medicare policy requires too much of an out-of-pocket expense. And sometimes patients just don't know about it, right? And so we can fund the innovative therapy, but that's just step one. We still have to make sure that everybody can access it and that it's not a backbreaking, bankrupting therapy for patients and their families.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about the advocacy side of what you just mentioned, because you have to break through to policymakers. Obviously, at the state, federal levels, that's one of the stakeholder groups that you have to influence. And I know that you have grassroots advocacy, getting patients engaged in that work and their families, but you also have to take complex subjects and translate those. I've seen your animated videos that sort of take something that's hard to explain and, make it into more like a cartoon that you can explain. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about some of those approaches to advocacy and why that's so important.
Advocacy is about converting a patient experience, a patient lived experience or story into meaningful policy change, right? So we at LLS, we have great exposures to patients and families, and we hear the challenges that they have in accessing care or the challenge that they have in paying for their medications. We need to work with policy experts who can translate that information into meaningful policy recommendations, and with an understanding of how things work in Washington as well as the state legislatures. And then we need to educate policymakers and their staffers about why we're proposing it. And that brings it back to the patient and family, right? That education isn't best coming from a healthcare lobbyist or a LLS lobbyist. It is best coming directly from this constituent. So you mentioned videos and all the education materials, all that stuff is on our website. But we also get together with patients and families once or twice a year in Washington. We identify key policies where the timing is right for a push from us. And we bring the patients and families from all over the country to Washington. We train them on why that policy is important. We train them on what some of the key talking points are. And then we train them how to layer their own lived experience into that message. And then we set them loose on the Capitol with their with real life lobbyists supporting them, appointments with their state delegations and the Congress from the House and the Senate side. And we educate the staffers and we educate the Congress people as well to try to move the needle on some of these policy recommendations. And a great example is the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act. This was a policy change to make it easier for children to get care in across state lines. So about 50% of kids in the country are covered by Medicaid, state Medicaid. So their policy provider is their healthcare policy provider is the state Medicaid system. If those kids get cancer, which is always a rare disease, yes, many of them can get care in their state, but pediatric cancer care is so specialized that there's some therapies that just aren't available in every state. So those kids need to travel. That Medicaid policy has to cover care in another state. Could be a neighboring state, could be farther away. And right now, that's very difficult to do. So LLS brought a community of advocates together in October in DC to lobby for accelerating kids' access to care. We left Washington with bipartisan co-sponsorship of the bill. And just last week, we heard that it made it through committee with a unanimous 42-0 vote. And we can't do that nobody can do that as a freestanding nonprofit. We have to do that by taking patient stories, merging it with the important policy initiatives, and then bringing it back to the patients to deliver the news. Why is this so important? And we're really proud of the success of the AKACA, really proud of the success that we've had over the years. And it's because of the community of volunteers that come to Washington, come to their state legislators, and listen to us and work with us to make sure that we're advocating for policies that are meaningful for them.
Well, what a great victory. There are not too
Yeah.
many these days that are unanimous on Capitol Hill that get everybody to agree.
No comment on that.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. So that's good. I hope it continues at the same pace. Now that it's out of committee. But I think that's such a good example of how to influence policy. What you said is you have to create your own communication. You have these things on your website. You have professionals, but that's not enough. You also have to engage the people who have those lived experiences, and train them and enable them and convene them. And obviously that led to the victory that you just saw that'll make lives better for kids who have cancer and their families. So
absolutely.
When it comes to kind of educating folks around these topics, a friend of mine recently donated bone marrow. And I was surprised to learn through that experience, while it was certainly no cakewalk, it wasn't as invasive as I had imagined. They did not have to, cut into his bones. There are these advanced ways that they're able to do this now that I had no idea about. And I wondered if you could just talk about some of the innovations and therapies and how you communicate that to patients and the publics, because, for example, probably more people would sign up to donate bone marrow if they did not know, or if they knew rather that, it's not as invasive as one might imagine. And I just think there are all of these really cool things happening, but it's a noisy world. It's kind of hard to get that information to the right people to impact their decisions. So I wonder if you could share a little bit on the innovation side, and just how do you make sure you cut through the noise with that information?
It's hard, and it's gotten harder over the last few years as some of the pace of innovation has accelerated. We have certainly pivoted. If you look at our how we are distributing our funded dollars, we are doing more work to make sure it's not just patients and families, it's not just the lay community, it's everybody. We work with pharmaceutical companies to educate them about ways that they can do trials in that address unmet needs, older adults, younger patients, for example. So we're always educating pharmaceutical industry. We're educating regulators like the FDA and the FDA's counterpart in Europe, the EMA, on what are some of the barriers to drug development? What are the things that are holding us back? Why do companies slow or end development when there still is an unmet need? And then we work with clinicians to help them solve problems around equitable access to care, and around more equitable distribution of enrollment across clinical trials. And we have specific funding mechanisms dedicated to making sure the clinical trial populations are geographically, racially, and ethnically diverse, which is not our history in this country. And then lastly, with the patient and family, we do a lot of work when there's a new innovative therapy that comes to clinical use, to make sure that they know that they can access that therapy, and not just that they can access it. How do they access it? What's the process to get insurance approval? What resources are available if they need travel assistance or copay support? And if those therapies are only accessible through a clinical trial, making sure that they have a nurse navigator that can help them identify the clinical trial that's right for them. All of that, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of people. It's not easy to do, but we make sure that our information resource center, social workers, and our clinical trial support center nurses are as up to date as anybody in the country and has access to all of the newest information on what's available to patients and families. And when we see a gap, when we see a population of patients, for example, patients with myeloma that still have uh, an opportunity for better education around what's available to them, we dedicate specific resources. For example, we run a program called Myeloma Link, which is about education around or specific education to communities that are more frequently affected, and to make sure that those communities are aware of what's available to them and how they can have better outcomes if they are diagnosed with the disease. So it is a constant struggle to keep up, but it is critical to our mission that we do so.
Yeah. Well, and knowing that that's a challenge and front and center,
Yeah,
obviously develop more ways to chip away at it because it's not an easy thing to do.
yeah,
You mentioned health equity as part of that, and that's obviously a term that we're hearing a lot more. It's a major focus, and I know it's a focus of yours at LLS. I wonder if you could talk about um, if there's any experience that you bring to those conversations when you're trying to get all of those various stakeholders to collaborate, and you're trying to highlight the importance of health equity. What experience do you bring as a clinician and a researcher to that conversation that might be different and help get those players on board?
yeah. I've as a pediatric oncologist, I am used to working with young families that have a lot of kids, young families that may not have a very big safety net, young families where there may only be one parent that's involved in treatment of the child, and I've worked in urban and rural communities, um, and that experience again is just a reminder that the um, creating the drug itself, creating the therapy itself is only one step in the process. We have to address issues around education. We have to address issues around access to care. We have to make sure that we have diverse populations that enroll in clinical trials. Otherwise, we're not learning how to effectively use the therapies that are approved. And so that my own real world lived experience around complexity of care delivery, uh, just reinforces how important organizations like our LLS are in supporting patients and families in their journeys.
Yeah. And you mentioned this a bit earlier, but I want to kind of call out a specific initiative. So through the Pediatric Acute Leukemia Master Clinical Trial, which is called LLS PEDAL for short, LLS has really tried to fundamentally change how children with pediatric acute leukemia are treated. And you mentioned, obviously pediatrics is your background, pediatric oncology, and that's a focus that you've brought. But I wonder if you could share just a bit more about that, because for an organization that's been around for a while, this is, I think it sounds like maybe an evolution, focusing on a growing need, and I think it's worth diving deeper into.
As I mentioned, I've spent most of my career developing new therapies for kids with cancer, and a sad but common theme is that we find a therapy that has the potential to benefit kids, but the development of that therapy is really based on the outcomes in adult with cancer, often unrelated cancers, that that the market forces that drive drug development are really overwhelmed by the incidence and efficacy or effectiveness of the drug in adults, not in the pediatric populations. The FDA has been very intentional about creating incentives and requirements that favor drug development in kids, but they often fall short, or companies figure out ways to delay or still discontinue pediatric development. And so what the pedal initiative tries to do is to reduce some of the activation energy. Um, Companies call new drugs assets, right? They spend billions in developing these therapies. And a pediatric trial may be viewed by them as risk. It's risk that the drug's not going to work in kids. It's risk that the drug's going to cause toxicity. That's going to make the drug less favorable in adults. And there's risk that they could invest in a trial in a rare disease that's just very slow and very expensive. So what LLS has tried to do is to de-risk these trials. So to bring key opinion leaders to the table that can show the companies why it's important to do the study and how it can be done safely and effectively. To bring to the table some processes that again reduce the activation energy. So contracting efficiencies and activation efficiencies around ethics approval and all of that. And then lastly, when needed, that there's opportunities for LLS to fund some gaps so that an early biotech that may only have a staff of a few dozen people, they don't have a lot of bandwidth to run a pediatric trial before they see efficacy in adults. But if we want these drugs to get into kids early, maybe we have to take on some of that responsibility and help develop the trial, bring the contract research organization to the table that can do the work that the company would otherwise have to do themselves. So it's a big investment with the goal of getting the most effective therapies into kids as quickly as possible. And just as one example, there are drugs that are approved in adults with leukemia and have been approved for many years that still haven't been effectively tested in kids, and or they're being tested at the end of their life cycle. So it's already been used in adults for many years, and now the pediatric trials are finally underway. And we want to turn that around, right? We want kids to be part of the very initial early development plan, but to do it, we've got to de-risk the trials, bring expertise to the table, and when necessary, bring critical funding to the table as well.
Yeah, and this is something that most of us probably never had to think much about. But the additional complexity when you're thinking about pediatrics and, like you said, treatments that might be used for a long time with adults that haven't been brought over yet. I can only imagine that, clinical trials with kids is probably a lot harder to do for a number of reasons. And so what I'm hearing from you, though, is, LLS is in a really perfect place, and especially under your leadership, because you've been part of this so long, to identify where those gaps are and then to play a role in the gaps where maybe the market's not able to do it by itself because of the incentives that are in place, and figuring out how to exert influence in that way. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, and I think the key to everything that we do is that, yes, we identify the gaps, but we are always looking at those gaps through the lens of the patient and family, right? That we're not trying to help pharmaceutical industry make more money or biotech to make more money. We are trying to make sure that the patient and family benefit from everything that we do. And if there are gaps in the system, despite FDA incentives, despite very well-meaning people working in the pharmaceutical industry, despite great science to support rationale, if there are gaps that are preventing drugs to getting into kids as quickly as possible, we need to show what that means to a patient and family. We need to be able to solve the problems that can minimize those delays, those gaps as much as possible.
And to be able to play that role, you have to have built up so much trust among all of those players. I was looking, on the Pedal website, there's this graphic. It's almost like a honeycomb of the various different groups. It's international collaborators, it's regulatory agencies, it's philanthropy, it's pharma. It's like really complex. And the only way that LLS can do that effectively is obviously over a period of time through the work you've done and the relationships that you've built up, is building trust. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your perspective on that, because, we live in an age right now where, brands aren't as trusted as they once were, and the media is not trusted as it once was. But your organization has done an incredible job of positioning itself and maintaining itself as just a trusted force for good, and one that, as you said, puts patients at the center.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to your previous question about the clinical perspective. I mean, it is it's an absolute privilege to be in a position where we can advocate for patients and families, right? That we take that role very seriously. If we were to deviate from keeping the patient and family at the center of everything that we do, um, we wouldn't have as strong a voice in that ecosystem, right? That everybody knows where we stand. Everybody knows the expertise that we have. Everybody knows the lengths that that we're willing to go to support innovation, to support patient services, to support public policy changes, meaningful changes in policy. And we take that role very seriously. That goes back to the brand that matters comments. That's our brand. That's who we are as an organization. And we everything that we do is geared towards better outcomes for patients and families.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about trust being one of them. Some of the things that are consistent across your role as a clinician to CEO, and we talked about how you made the transition with a listening tour. But from a leader perspective for yourself, I'm just wondering, what did you have to do, if anything, to sort of shift your mindset to say, this is a very different type of role, and to just prepare yourself for that different way of operating and the different responsibilities. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, because many leaders find themselves at a point where they take on a new responsibility or a new role. They kind of have to switch gears, and you've done that in a big way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, big way. I think a lot of it is just never taking yourself too seriously and going into every situation with a learner's mindset that I'm going to um, have to listen before I act. I'm going to have to um, uh, take into account the opinions of the experts in the room, and often I am not the expert in the room in this first year. So it the transition from the clinical side isn't that hard, because clinical medicine is all about listening and watching and synthesizing a lot of data. So that skill transitioned, or um, served me very well. Where it has been a challenge is learning the business of running a 1,100 person organization. And fortunately, LLS has amazing leaders at all levels of the organization who have been very patient and instructive. So it has been just such an exciting year for me um, uh, to learn what it takes to be CEO of a large organization like this. And at the end of the day, you know, I am in it for the same reason I always have been, which is to um, serve patients and families in need, and I feel the impact that I have in this position now is is different and maybe greater than anything I've done before.
Hmm. You didn't use this specific word, but something that I hear a lot in your answer, and that I've heard from your team, is just bringing a level of humility to this um, transition. Sounds like it's been really, powerful for you. And I'm sure that sends such a great message to those around you that, like you said, you're have these great leaders, you don't have all the answers. And, it sounds like that's probably a theme of that transition that's made it one that's, a really enriching and exciting one, and a successful one so far.
Well, I've been hanging out with kids for the last 25 years, so humility comes easy. They're not impressed by anything.
Right. Yeah. They don't care how many years you went to school or all of those things.
Yep.
It sounds like, both as CEO, but also as a clinician, you have to really balance speaking to the head and speaking to the heart. And that's kind of an important balance. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how do you harness empathy as a leader without letting it affect you too deeply? And, going back to something I said earlier, you've had to have the toughest conversations that anybody ever has to have with a family. And so there's obviously this emotional connection, but at the same time, I mean, you can't let that overwhelm you. And I think that's probably true of a CEO as well. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
It's, for me, it's about leaning into what the issues are, acknowledging, bearing witness, never shying away from it. It's hard. It's hard to do. But that is, again, that's the experience of the patients and families that we serve. So we need to know what that is. Um, you don't ever become hardened to it, but you do familiarize yourself with your own reactions and your own ability to incorporate that experience and react. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to problem solving, right? That lived experience is the result of specific challenges, and we need to continue to collect those stories and address those problems, whether it's the need for new therapies, the need for better education and awareness, the need for significant changes in policy. We have to lean into those patient experiences, allow ourselves to be affected by them, and then get to work and hopefully alongside with those patients and families to solve the big problems that they face.
Yeah. Hmm. I want to switch gears for a second. Right now, a lot of leaders are grappling with, a new normal that we're all living in with remote work and hybrid work. And, I would imagine in your career before this role as a clinician, and I mean, you're probably in whatever the office environment or the clinical environment, and you're probably going to different locations, but every day. And now I suspect you have a workforce that is increasingly working remotely and meeting over Zoom. So I'd love to hear your perspective as a leader about managing that. I don't think anything's gonna, go back to the way.
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna return to what it used to be, right?
That was a great question. I think, as a clinician, we were remote for a half a day in March of 2020 and then had to come back to work and just figure it out, right? And um, it was a really a very challenging time for all of us. But I have not developed that remote working skill, or had not before joining LLS. And though it always collaborated with people through Zoom, Teams, old-fashioned conference calls, whatever it might be, I often feel like when I get a question like that, in leading an organization where everybody is so committed to the mission and that connection to the patient and family, we're cheating a little bit, right? We've got a leg up on maybe some for-profit companies, because if you're connected to the mission, there's nothing that's going to keep you from doing a great job. And and that's always an easy way to connect with people on Zoom. When we have big meetings, for example, as a company, as an organization, we will always start with a mission moment to bring ourselves back to the patient experience, to bring ourselves back to some exciting innovation that has come out of research that we've funded. And that grounding moment is a great way to make sure everybody's present, everybody's inspired, everybody's ready to get to work. And that type of connection and that type of reminder surrounds us in the nonprofit world. So we are able to connect with people. But then we also have to be intentional about when do we get together. In a nonprofit organization, we have to be careful about how we spend every dollar. Every dollar we spend on operations is something that we're taking away from mission. But there are opportunities for us and a requirement for us to be together in a room and work on complex problems. And we do that very intentionally with our leaders, and then each of our teams in the organization do that very intentionally as well. It's also a reminder that when you get together, you got to be on your game. This is not a vacation. This is a business meeting. And, our leaders just bring the energy and the enthusiasm and the mission to the room, and it usually works out really well.
Hmm. I love how you um, thought about, we may not be connected physically, right? And that's a new thing, but that we can still remain connected to the mission, right?
Yep.
No,
Yep.
That's the important connection. Whether we're in the same room or on Zoom or whatever, that's sort of, secondary. And I haven't, heard it put quite that way before, kind of, using the turn of phrase in both directions. And I really like that. And I think you're right. If you have a team that's all focused on a mission, and when you're a nonprofit, and perhaps that could be easier, but any type of organization, having that common cause and moving everybody toward it and staying connected to it is the important thing. And
Yeah, I have two very good friends. One's the CEO of a bank, and one's the owner of a small, mid-sized business. And I feel like it's that mission connection that compared to them, again, I feel like I'm cheating sometimes. That this is easy. It's easy to get people connected. We just go back to why we're here.
that's fantastic. I want to just close by asking you, obviously, healthcare is where you've been your whole career, but when you think about how you show up and influence all those different stakeholders that we talked about to pursue your mission, I wonder if there are any places that you get inspiration sort of outside of the day jobs that we've heard about, that impacts how you show up, how you influence people, how you bring folks along to achieve results.
I listen to a lot of podcasts, Chief Influencer among them. I listen to a lot of books when I have an opportunity to, and that's where I get inspiration, a range of things, fiction, nonfiction, and just get inspiration that will tie me back to why we're doing what we're doing, how to lead people, how to motivate people, all of that.
Yeah. Wow, that's really well said. I, feel very fortunate that as the host of Chief Influencer, I get to meet with all these incredible leaders, and I've picked up a lot from this conversation with you, Dr. Andy Kolb from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And I think as we think about the transition that you made from a pediatric oncologist, somebody who was working with children and families in one way, and how you've shifted to this new role over the last about year as CEO and brought that lived experience that you have. What came through is empathy, listening, humility, and some really great examples of how you have showed up, especially with a listening tour at the beginning to advance your mission. And it's no wonder that LLS has gotten accolades and is continuing to get accolades. And of course, recently a great success in terms of the policy changes that you're trying to make to improve the lives of children with cancer and their families. So I just can't thank you enough for spending time with us today and sharing your story. And for folks who want to find out more about you, they can check out the LLS website and maybe check out your LinkedIn. Is there anything else that you would like to say about where they should follow you or Leukemia Lymphoma Society?
LLS.org. But I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for hosting me. It's a great discussion.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.